The way she'd stopped asking about my day while telling me everything about hers in vague, polished summaries. I didn't confront her that night. That wasn't a decision made out of dignity. It was instinct. I needed facts, not explanations. Explanations are what guilty people prepare in advance. Over the next week, I watched quietly. I listened without reacting. I noticed details I had trained myself to ignore before. She mentioned a colleague named Alex more than necessary. She talked about him in neutral tones, which is how people hide importance. She took phone calls in the bathroom. She smiled at messages she didn't share. She started correcting me when I referred to us as a unit, like we should or we planned. She replaced those words with I. I checked our bank statements. Nothing obvious, but enough small cash withdrawals to raise questions. I checked our shared calendar. Entries deleted. I checked social media. Her profile had been cleaned recently, old photos archived, tags removed. I checked her email one night when she forgot to log out on the tablet. No love letters. No smoking gun. Just confirmation that she was careful. The restaurant incident didn't leave my head. I called the venue pretending to be from accounting, asked for a copy of the guest list invoice. Companies get sloppy with paperwork. The email arrived the next morning. There it was again. Her name. Listed under a different surname. Married. The company had paid for a table for Mr. and Mrs. with that name. I searched it. The man existed. Not a coincidence. Same industry. Same office building. Married on paper. No social media presence together, which made sense. This wasn't romance. This was logistics. I realized something important then. This wasn't an affair that happened because of feelings. This was a system. It had rules, cover stories, and roles. And I had been assigned mine without being informed. I started keeping notes. Dates. Times. Inconsistencies. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask questions she could prepare answers for. I became background noise in my own home. She didn't notice the change. People who think they're in control stop checking their surroundings. A week before Christmas, she told me she had another work event. Smaller. Mandatory. Overnight. She said she felt bad leaving me alone again, especially with my stomach still acting up. She suggested I visit my parents. I nodded and agreed. That night, after she fell asleep, I opened the safe. I checked documents I hadn't looked at since we moved in together. Property agreements. Insurance policies. Copies of IDs. I noticed what was missing. I noticed what had been moved. By then, the story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about replacement. She wasn't cheating on me. She was transitioning out of me. And I finally understood why the guard had said the word husband so easily. To him, I wasn't standing outside a party. I was standing outside a finished decision. Once I accepted that I was no longer the main character in my own marriage, everything became easier to organize. Panic disappears when the picture becomes complete. I stopped asking myself why she did it and focused on how long it had been happening, who benefited, and what she thought I didn't know. The first thing I did was separate emotion from logistics. Emotion makes people loud and predictable. Logistics makes them invisible. I kept behaving exactly as before. Same tone. Same routine. Same level of interest. I didn't accuse, didn't probe, didn't hint. I let her believe the disguise was working, because disguises only protect people who think they are unseen. I took a day off work without telling her. I parked near her office and watched from across the street. Not like a jealous husband hiding behind sunglasses, but like someone doing inventory. She left at lunch with the man whose surname she had quietly borrowed. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. Familiarity had already replaced excitement. They walked side by side, discussing something practical, stopping at a cafe where staff clearly knew them as a pair. She laughed differently with him. Not louder. Not happier. Just more certain. I followed at a distance and learned their patterns. Same days. Same timing. Predictable routes. No passion, no secrecy panic, no fear of being seen. That told me everything. This wasn't something new. This was settled. That evening, she came home and complained about work, about pressure, about how exhausting December always was. She asked about my stomach. I told her it felt better. That was the first true thing I'd said to her in weeks. I started copying documents the next day. Quietly. Systematically. Anything that had my name on it. Anything that had hers. Anything that linked us financially or legally. I discovered she had already done some of this herself. Files missing. Folders rearranged. It wasn't sloppy. It was staged. I checked our lease. My name was primary. I checked utilities. Split. I checked insurance. Beneficiary changed 3 months earlier. She hadn't mentioned it. She didn't have to. She assumed I wouldn't notice until it no longer mattered. The man existed everywhere I looked once I knew how to search. Corporate records. Industry events. Professional photos where she stood just outside the frame. He wasn't hiding her. He was waiting for her to arrive fully detached. What surprised me wasn't the betrayal. It was the patience. She hadn't rushed. She hadn't panicked. She had planned her exit like a relocation, not an escape. I confronted neither of them. Not because I was afraid, but because confrontation would only reset their strategy. People tell the truth when they believe the timeline is still under their control. I needed them comfortable. A few days before Christmas, she suggested we simplify gifts this year. Said money felt tight. Said it was smarter to be practical. I agreed and watched her relief flicker across her face before she hit it. That told me she had already budgeted without me. That night, I made copies of everything and stored them outside the apartment. Cloud storage. Physical backups. Redundancy is what separates preparation from hope. I also called a lawyer. I didn't dramatize the story. I didn't use words like betrayal or affair. I laid out facts. Names. Dates. Documents. The lawyer listened quietly and said something useful. He said people who run two lives usually leave paper trails because they believe paperwork is boring enough to be safe. He was right. By Christmas Eve, I knew enough to act, but I didn't. Acting too early would have given her a chance to rewrite the ending. I wanted her to walk into it without warning. She left again that night, said it was another work obligation. She hugged me longer than usual, not out of love, but out of closure. People say goodbye in advance when they think the other person won't notice. I waited an hour after she left, then opened her laptop. She'd been careful, but not perfect. Logged in accounts. Shared drives. A draft email saved but never sent. It wasn't romantic. It was administrative. A discussion about timing, optics, and the least disruptive way to announce a separation after the holidays. They used language like project managers. Risks. Dependencies. Transition period. I didn't feel anger. I felt something closer to professional curiosity. I was reading the minutes of a meeting where my life had been discussed as a variable. I packed a small bag and left the apartment that night. Not because I was running, but because I wanted to see how the house behaved without me. When I returned 2 days later, nothing had changed on the surface. She greeted me with relief that felt practiced. She asked if I was feeling better. I told her yes. On December 27th, she told me we needed to talk soon. Not urgently. Soon. That word is important. Soon means already decided. I told her we could talk after New Year's. I said holidays were stressful enough. She agreed too quickly. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 came when she underestimated silence. She assumed my calm meant ignorance. She assumed my lack of questions meant trust. People confuse absence of reaction with absence of awareness. I wasn't waiting to save the marriage. I was waiting to close it properly. The final confirmation came when I received an email meant for someone else. A calendar invite forwarded incorrectly. A dinner reservation. 2 names. Their shared surname. January 3rd. A celebration dinner. Not an affair anniversary. A beginning. That was when I stopped observing and started arranging. From the moment I knew the date they planned to celebrate, everything became structured. January 3rd wasn't just a dinner. It was a marker. People don't celebrate midweek unless something has officially ended and something else has officially begun. That meant she believed the separation phase was complete. She believed I had accepted my role as temporary storage. I didn't argue. I didn't resist. I helped. I started agreeing with her more often. I nodded when she complained about how distant we'd become. I admitted I'd been tired lately, distracted, unsure about the future. I let her hear the words she needed to justify her exit. People leaving don't want conflict, they want confirmation that leaving is reasonable. She relaxed. She stopped watching her phone as closely. She stopped hiding small details. She mentioned his name once by accident, then corrected herself too late. She talked about moving neighborhoods as if it were a casual thought. She asked what I would do if we ever decided to take a break. That phrase was deliberate. A break sounds temporary. It sounds gentle. It sounds like something that doesn't require consequences. I told her I'd probably stay quiet, focus on work, keep things simple. I told her I didn't want drama. I saw relief settle into her posture. That was the moment she decided I wouldn't be a problem. Behind that calm surface, I finalized everything. I met with the lawyer again and handed over the full timeline. Documents. Screenshots. Email drafts. Bank statements. The guest list from the restaurant. The insurance change. The calendar invite. He didn't react emotionally. He didn't need to. He told me exactly when to file, what not to say, and which conversations should never happen without witnesses or records. I also protected what mattered. I changed passwords she didn't know existed. I redirected mail. I photographed items in the apartment that were mine. I removed irreplaceable things slowly so their absence wouldn't be noticed. People don't miss objects immediately. They miss patterns. On December 30th, she told me she'd be staying late again. She didn't bother with details. She didn't need to. She believed I was already detaching emotionally. That belief made her careless. While she was gone, I packed everything that legally belonged to me and left what didn't. I didn't trash the place. I didn't dramatize. I left it clean, organized, neutral. No notes. No accusations. No last messages. Silence is harder to argue with than anger. I spent New Year's Eve alone in a rented apartment with boxes stacked against the wall. I didn't feel lonely. I felt precise. Every step I'd taken over the past weeks had been intentional. There were no loose ends. On January 1st, she texted me like nothing had changed. Asked how I was feeling. Wished me a calm start to the year. I replied politely. Briefly. She interpreted that as acceptance. On January 2nd, I filed. Not dramatically. Not publicly. Just efficiently. Divorce papers submitted with supporting documentation attached. The timeline mattered. Once filed, certain actions become restricted. Accounts freeze. Transfers raise flags. Stories stop working. She didn't know yet. On January 3rd, while she was getting ready for the dinner she thought marked her freedom, she received the notification. Not from me. From her lawyer. From the system. From reality. She called me immediately. I didn't answer. She texted. Asked what was going on. Asked why I hadn't said anything. Asked if this was some kind of mistake. I waited. Timing matters. I responded only after I knew she was already on her way to that restaurant. I told her we didn't need to talk anymore. I told her everything had already been said through actions. I told her I wished her well with the life she'd already started building. She didn't reply after that. Later that night, I checked my email. Her celebration dinner reservation had been cancelled. Not by her. By the venue. Because the billing contact had been changed. Because the card on file had been flagged. Because transitions are never as smooth as people imagine. She came home late. I wasn't there. She walked into an apartment that no longer belonged to both of us. The quiet this time wasn't temporary. The next morning, she tried to negotiate. She suggested mediation. She suggested space. She suggested we had rushed things. She used words like misunderstanding and timing. She didn't deny anything. Denial would have required energy she didn't have anymore. I responded through the lawyer. That was when the man finally appeared directly. He called me. Introduced himself politely. Told me he didn't want hostility. Told me he respected me. Told me he thought things had been handled differently. I told him I agreed. I told him that's why everything was already handled. The last thing I did that week was return to the restaurant where security had stopped me. I sat at the bar alone. Ordered a drink. Watched couples arrive for private events. I remembered how small I'd felt standing outside that door. I didn't feel that way anymore. She realized the cost of her exit in stages, not all at once. People like her expect consequences to arrive loudly, with shouting and confrontation. When nothing like that happens, they assume they escaped cleanly. That illusion lasts until the practical damage starts stacking up. The first loss was speed. Everything she planned to do quickly began moving slowly. Accounts she expected to access required approvals. Transfers stalled. Conversations that should have been informal became formal. People who had smiled at her suddenly asked for documentation. The system she thought she controlled no longer recognized her authority. She tried to regain footing by rewriting the narrative. She told friends we had drifted apart naturally. She said I had withdrawn. She said the separation was mutual and civilized. That version survived exactly until paperwork started circulating. Timelines don't lie, and neither do dates stamped by institutions. Then came the financial recalibration. She had assumed continuity. Same lifestyle, same comfort, just a different partner filling the space I used to occupy. That assumption collapsed quickly. What she thought was shared turned out to be conditional. What she believed was flexible turned out to be fixed. She contacted me again, not to argue, but to clarify. She asked if I was really willing to let everything end this way. She asked if there was room for adjustment. Adjustment is the word people use when they realize leverage has shifted. There wasn't. The man she had transitioned toward didn't disappear, but he changed. That was inevitable. He had signed up for a clean handover, not for complexity. He had expected me to exit quietly and remain cooperative. When that didn't happen, his patience thinned. People are generous when the price is low. Work noticed too. Not the affair, but the instability. Her focus slipped. Deadlines moved. Explanations multiplied. She had built her professional image on control and composure. Cracks in that image mattered more than any moral failure ever could. She asked for one final conversation. Not through lawyers. Directly. She said she wanted closure. Closure is another word people use when they want relief without responsibility. I agreed, but on my terms. We met in a public place, neutral, practical. No nostalgia built into the walls. She looked tired. Not guilty. Tired. That difference mattered. She didn't apologize for what she had done. She apologized for how things turned out. That told me everything. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said things had gotten complicated. She said she hadn't planned for it to unfold this way. She said she thought I'd understand eventually. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I told her something simple. I told her that understanding doesn't require acceptance. I told her that planning an exit while pretending to care is not complication, it's calculation. I told her that the moment she introduced another man as her husband in a public setting, she had already finalized the ending. She asked if I hated her. I told her no. Hate requires ongoing investment. I told her I had closed that account. That was the last time we spoke directly. The divorce finalized without drama. The paperwork spoke for itself. Assets were divided according to facts, not stories. She didn't get what she thought she would. She didn't lose everything either. People rarely do. But she lost the version of the future she had quietly promised herself. I moved on without announcements. New place. New routines. No public declarations of rebirth. Stability doesn't need witnesses. Months later, I heard through someone else that her relationship didn't last. Not because of betrayal, but because of exposure. Once the secrecy was gone, so was the appeal. Real life entered the room, and neither of them had prepared for it. I didn't feel vindicated when I heard that. Vindication is emotional. I felt confirmed. The stomach pain never came back. That wasn't coincidence. My body had reacted before my mind was willing to accept reality. Once reality was addressed, the symptoms disappeared. Sometimes I think about that night before Christmas, standing outside the restaurant while security checked a list. At the time, it felt humiliating. Now it feels instructional. It was the moment I learned how easily people replace others when they believe they can do it quietly. What she never understood is that silence isn't weakness. Silence is preparation. She left thinking she controlled the narrative, the timing, and the outcome. She was wrong on all three. I didn't chase. I didn't beg. I didn't explode. I stepped aside, documented everything, and closed the door properly. And that made all the difference.